Terry Hooley, the master blaster who plays them faster, and you're listening to the Ireland Podcast.
Hello, welcome to the Ireland Podcast. This is Fender Jackson. The time is 7:05 p.m. on Tuesday, the 30th of September 2025. I am in a Zoom call talking to this man. Who are you and what do you do?
This is Steve I, and I am a guitar player and musician, and I travel the world and share my guitar playing with everybody because the guitar is the coolest instrument in the world.
You said it.
Yeah.
We both share a bit of similar background in that we're both guitarists. Well, I play other things. I was actually a bass player initially. But we both agree that we should be a lot better than we are. We both agree that we should be a lot better than we are for all the time that we've been spending playing guitar.
Yeah. I don't know if that feeling ever goes away.
So you still feel that way?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it's something that overachievers suffer with. You know, what's interesting is I had not too long ago, I went back and I was looking at some clips of when I was younger and the way I performed, and I couldn't believe it. I mean, I was really tearing it up because, you know, because I know how I play now, and I look back and I remember thinking at the time, it's never quite good enough.
So whenever
you know
say,
what I mean,
whenever you say,
it's never quite good enough.
Whenever you're saying,
you know,
whenever you're saying tearing it up, you're gonna have to translate that for me. What does that mean? Shredding it beyond
shredding. Like I've seen clips of myself that are very extroverted and pretty wild. You know, I'm throwing the guitar around. I'm just really playing with more, you know, more with the fire of a 30-year-old.
Right.
You know.
And who were you playing with whenever you're looking at these clips?
Oh, my solo work. I see clips from. I saw a clip from a live video of the Eat 'Em and Smile tour, which was David Lee Roth back in the 80s. And that was, it's very rare because nobody was really filming during those things. And you know what? I'm going to take these off until we start listening.
Sure.
So I was able to kind of check out the show 30 years later, 40 years later, you know. And yeah, I mean, it was when you're that young, 25, 26, you know, there's a fire that's burning.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you have that youthful zeal. I still have a fire that burns, but I'm not going to be going out and swinging the guitar all over the place.
Yeah.
But I remember thinking, as I was watching this, what was going on in my head at the time I was performing it. You understand what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, what was going through my mind, I was trying not to think, you know, trying to just be very present with the situation. But I noticed that when I was actually performing on the stage, my attention was really in trying to execute the best I could with all the acrobatics I was doing, you know, and always kind of feeling, well, okay, that riff was okay, you know, but, you know, I'm going to have to get it better next time, you know, just constantly feeling like I'm a producer of myself, you know, I'm telling myself what I need to do better, what, you know, and how to move better and all these things. And, you know, at times we can be very critical in our own head about ourselves.
Yeah.
And I just remember, you know, my 65-year-old self looking back at that and thinking, how could you have been thinking anything that even remotely reflects falling short?
Yeah.
because it was fierce playing.
So you're,
And this is just my perspective on me. There were many other guitar players that were tearing it up at the time.
so your 25-year-old self is impressing your 65-year-old self.
Yes.
And do you feel you're a better guitarist now?
Well, in some aspects, but in other aspects, no. But in some aspects, yes, very much so. I mean, like an elite athlete, you have a technical, physiological peak, where your body is moving. It's at a particular pace. There's a particular intensity. If you see a tennis player, they have a relatively short shelf life, or a football player, or an elite athlete. Well, for elite musicians, we get a little longer shelf life, because it's just our hands and stuff. But still, after a while, your body changes, and I know my hands have gone through some real challenges, and just you don't practice as much as when you were 21. I don't sit there for like when I was a teenager and practice for 9 hours a day. So perhaps there's I think as a musician gets older, if they're like a virtuoso type, there's an edge that slowly starts to soften with the technique and the intensity. But something else comes along that has a depth to it. You start being more careful with the notes you play. They start having a different meaning to you. Your ability to reach and find melodies has changed. The way you hit the note, the dynamics, the articulation, the way that you phrase, the way the guitar speaks has evolved tremendously. A good example of that is Jeff Beck. Jeff Beck, he wasn't a shredder, so to speak. He wasn't going, all the time. So his BTUs, what he had to put out physically on the guitar.
BTUs, sorry, what are they?
It's just a measurement for the burning of energy.
Okay.
So when you're younger, you have a lot of BTU, so to speak. So someone like Jeff Beck, he's not necessarily a trained virtuoso where he has to keep up these incredible chops for his whole life. So his touch on the instrument isn't as, say, violent, so to speak, as someone that's a shredder. So, but Jeff Beck continued to improve through his entire life up to his last day. And I watched it, every album he released had something on it that was a beautiful evolution. And he was just getting older, and older. Mm-hmm. So I see that happening in a lot of guitar players that are career players, and I see it in myself. I still like to play shreddy stuff sometimes. But, through the years, for me, the two most important things, and you can even go back and this is true through my whole catalog, is melody and phrasing. That's where the soul of the music lies. It's in the melody. Melody has a very long shelf life, if it's good melody. And phrasing is so vital because, a guitar can sound like a series of Morse code, or it can sound like, a poet delivering a poem, It's all based on how you phrase.
Yeah.
And there's no end to evolving that. There's an end to evolving your speed and your intensity.
I'm hearing as you're talking, I'm hearing at the start of a career, your career maybe leaning more towards John Coltrane, and then towards the end, not saying you're at the end of your career, but in the latter half, let's say it, more like Miles Davis.
That's funny. I was thinking that's a great analogy. I think it's a good analogy. Yeah.
So, can you chart me through your career? Because the Ireland podcast is very general, and I mean, for anybody who knows guitar, you don't need an introduction. But there's going to be many people listening to this who are going, Steve, who? So, can you talk a little bit about your career up until 1985?
Well, I Italian parents, grew up in Long Island, New York. Originally discovered music at like 4 or 5 years old, and decided I wanted to compose music, and started doodling little notes, and then discovered the music of West Side Story. That's what my parents brought home when I was like 5 or 6, and changed my life. I really knew I wanted to compose. But then when I was 11 or so, I heard Led Zeppelin. And up until then, I was learning how to write music, and even I continued the compositional thing, but my brain kind of mixed, rock and roll with more high information music, and that's kind of the music I started to create. But I was in rock bands in high school, it was fantastic, and then I attended Berklee College of Music and started to transcribe music for Frank Zappa when I was 18. When I was 20, I moved to California and actually auditioned for Frank and got the gig and toured with him for 3 years. And after that, Frank had quit touring for a while, and I joined a band called Alcatraz, and I replaced Yngwie Malmsteen. And we made a great record called Disturbing the Peace. And then, but before that, when I left Frank, I built a little studio called Stucco Blue Studios and just started recording everything. And one of my experiments was a solo record called Flexible, and that was my first solo record. And it's a very peculiar, quirky, silly, fun, beautiful, homemade record. I didn't even expect to release it. I couldn't really get a record deal. The kind of record deals that were being offered to me, I thought were insane. So I ended up starting my own little label, which was perhaps one of the most economically biggest cash cows I ever engaged in. And then I joined Alcatraz, and then David Lee Roth was looking for a guitar player, and I got that gig, and we made 2 great records and toured the world a couple of times. And then I joined a band called Whitesnake. Many people know who that is, with David Coverdale, and we made Slip of the Tongue, which was a great record, great guys, great tour. It was really a lot of fun. And then after that, well, actually right before that, I released a solo record, a new one, and it was called Passion and Warfare. And that one kind of hit a nerve with guitar players and launched a solo career. So after Whitesnake, I became a solo artist, and I still am.
By the way, the transcribing Zappa, was that just a passion?
Yeah,
It
I
wasn't.
love doing it.
It wasn't like Frank was saying, "I need you to do this for me."
Oh, yeah. No, he gave me the assignments.
And how did your paths cross initially?
Well, like I said, I was really into high information music, but also rock. And there was no real, there were prog bands and progressive kinds of things and fusion. And that was all great. I loved all that. But there wasn't I was looking for composition, like real composition, But nobody was doing it until I heard Frank. When I heard Zappa's music, I was like, well, here it is, It's got everything I love, It's got wild guitar playing, great sense of humor, incredible musicianship, world-class historical stuff. And Frank was so prolific, and I just fell in love with it because it had all these elements, and it was so different and so diverse, so dense, and so beautiful at times, and so silly and funny and ugly too at times, which I liked. And so I kind of, was inspired, and I took my cues from Frank. But what was the original question? I want to make sure.
How did your paths cross? How did you meet?
Oh, so I was a fan, and I was sitting in my Long Island teenage bedroom, and a friend of mine came in. I was practicing, and he had stolen a Rolodex from a studio in New York City. It had all these rock and pop star names, and he's reading them off to me, and I'm like, "Oh, wow, Mick Jagger, cool." Oh, Bob Dylan, you got Bob Dylan's phone number. Oh, cool, and he's going through all these lists, and then he gets to the Z's. And he goes, "Oh, and I got Frank Zappa's home phone number." And I'm like, "You got what?" So I took it and I called Frank. And
18 years old.
I was 16. And he wasn't there. His wife answered, and she said, "Call back in 6 months. He's on tour." So I did. And she said, "Well, he's not here. Call back in 6 months." So I did. And I did that for a couple of years. And then finally one day, I was 18. I was in my friend's apartment in Boston. And I called, and he picked up the phone. And now I was just a fan, getting to know Frank and Gail later, I was shocked that she even took the first call, and that Frank then had a conversation with me. He was very nice, And he said, well, my in was, I knew that Frank was a fan of Edgar Varese, who was a very contemporary composer, and was looking for his scores. And the Boston Public Library had the scores. So I went in and Xeroxed them, and I said, "Hey, Frank, I have the Edgar Varese scores. Can I send them to you?" And I also wanted to send him a transcription of one of his pieces of music called The Black Page that I did, and also a tape of my band. So I sent him all that stuff, and I didn't know if I'd ever hear from him. He gave me his home address to send it to, which was pretty wild. I mean, there was so much later on that I'd come to realize was uncanny, how it all happened, So he liked the tape enough and the transcription where he wanted to. He called. We then spoke, and he wanted to try me out for the band. And I was at Berkeley, and I told him I was 18, and he said, "Well, forget it. You're too young." So he hired me to transcribe because Frank, he was really into that kind of stuff. And he had all these, at first it was all these guitar solos with drum parts, Vinnie Colaiuta, and it was incredibly complex music. But for some reason, I had a hankering for it, and I understood it totally, and I was really good at it, So I just started transcribing, and the transcriptions that I did for Frank, they all were approved by him, of course. So at first he gave me these tapes and asked me to transcribe these guitar solos, and then he put me on salary to transcribe. And one of my tasks was to go through his entire catalog and make sure there was lead sheets for everything. And in some instances, he wanted me to transcribe the song's every instrument. So like the Roxy and Elsewhere record, I transcribed every note on that record, So I just liked doing that, It was just something, it was probably one of the, besides music, there was nothing that I was so interested in or could do very well at all. I could ride a bicycle really well and a motorcycle. I could do wheelies and turn around and stand on the seat. I don't know.
But that's a serious.
I was a good golfer too, and a pool player. I beat everybody's ass at pool.
But that's a serious skill, being able to transcribe dense music with strange chord sequences and strange rhythms and time signatures and all the rest.
Yeah, it's a well-kept secret.
Yeah. Don't tell anybody.
Well, there is a book out that Frank published called the Frank Zappa Guitar Songbook, and it has a lot of my transcriptions. And if you go and you look at that, I can virtually guarantee you've never seen music that complicated. That the rhythmic, the polymetric, the polyrhythmic aspects of it are really quite off the charts,
Um,
even for Zappa.
And what would you do whenever you came across a piece? Because I work out stuff myself. You hit a piece and you think, I cannot hear the notes, I cannot make them out, or do you never get to that period?
Well, there's various reasons why you can't make them out. Sometimes they're sloppy, sometimes they're buried, and sometimes you make mistakes.
Okay.
Yeah, was that the question?
I guess so. No, what would you do if you came across notes that were buried or sloppy?
Well, I would pick up the guitar. If it was a guitar transcription, like if I was working on Frank's stuff, usually with Frank's stuff, I would just, because it was all pretty modal, you can hear if you know the scale, you can pick the notes by the intervals. I don't have perfect pitch, but I have pretty good relative pitch. If I was doing a guitar transcription and I couldn't hear the notes, I'd pick up the guitar, I'd see what he was going for, and I might have to make an educated guess.
Yeah.
At times, yeah.
Okay, so 1985, and how on earth do you end up in a recording session with John Lydon?
Well, interesting story. I was on tour with Alcatraz, and my good friend at the time, Cliff Coltrane, was working with, he was friends with the producer.
Bill Laswell.
Bill Laswell, of course. And Bill was working on this record with Lydon, this Pill record. And they had Ginger Baker, and they were kind of copying this African kind of tribal groove thing, which, African music, traditional African music is just so beautiful. I mean, the grooves, the rhythm, there's a deep spiritual element in it because they are so authentic with their expression. They're not trying to get on the radio. They're expressing their traditions, their cultures, and as such, it's created all countries. And I did a great research project on this, and I actually made a record called "Alive in an Ultra World," where I took music, cultural, traditional, almost classical music from all these different countries. And it was such an incredible experience to hear all these different things. But they had taken sort of like a traditional African feel and put it on the record. So they were looking Bill called Cliff and was looking for a guitar player. And I don't know if Bill called him to get to me or if Cliff suggested, no, you got to get Vi, which was an interesting choice because, most people wouldn't put John Lydon's name in the same sentence as Steve Vai. They were very different musically, but I've adored the Sex Pistols and Lydon. I mean, he's such a character, my God. So interesting, so funny, And so I was on tour and I had to get this done, but I couldn't just stop touring, but I wanted to do it. And they were recording in New York at Electric Ladyland. So I went in on 2 days that I had off, but they were 2 separate days and I could only do a half a day. I went in for a couple hours and then I went in for a couple hours again or whatever. And it was great. I didn't really have a lot time to prepare or anything. So a lot of it was just done on the spot. There's one solo, I can't remember which one, but I remember I was sitting at the console with Bill and he said, okay, I want you to just solo through this.
Without
I said, okay. What?
Without hearing the track before.
I didn't hear it. I hadn't heard the track.
So you don't know what key it's in?
I knew nothing. And I said, okay, well, let me hear the track. And he goes, no, just play.
Cool.
So he hit record and play and left the room. And I'm just like, okay, game on, you know? And I just played, I just was in the moment, you know, I played through it. And he came back and he goes, how'd it go? And I said, you know what? I think it went pretty good, actually. Felt good to me. You want to hear it? And he goes, nope, let's move on.
Well, shall we go through the record then? Shall we press play and...
Sure, I'll put my headphones on.
Thank you for listening. If you know someone who might value this conversation, feel free to pass it on. The Ireland podcast is intended as a record of long-form conversations like this. And if you would like to support the continuation of the work, there is a link in the notes. Take care.